Alright guys, so we got some updates on Israel, Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon that I want to get to in this video, as the IDF has essentially shifted into a new phase of quiet genocide inside of Gaza, with hundreds of violations of the ceasefire, Palestinians killed on a near daily basis, as they also expand their illegal settlements in the West Bank and drastically ramp up the IDF-backed settler violence against Palestinians there, as well as they're also threatening to expand their bombing campaign inside of Lebanon, all the way up to potentially including inside of Beirut. So a lot that I want to get to in this video. We're going to go ahead and start off with this new article that came out from The Guardian on this documentary that aired, I believe, yesterday in the UK on Israeli soldiers basically admitting what the US government and the Israeli government have never and will never admit, that yes, IDF soldiers inside of Gaza have been in a widespread, systematic way intentionally targeting civilians. So the headline here from The Guardian is Israeli soldiers speak out on killing of Gaza's civilians. So they say Israeli soldiers have described a free-for-all in Gaza and a breakdown in norms and legal constraints, with civilians killed at the whim of individual officers, according to a testimony in this TV documentary, with a quote here saying, "If you want to shoot without restraint, you can," says Daniel, the commander of an IDF tank unit in this documentary, breaking ranks inside Israel's war. They say the soldiers who agreed to talk confirmed the IDF's routine use of human shields, contradicting official denials, and gave details of Israeli troops opening fire unprovoked on civilians racing to reach food handouts at the militarized distribution points set up by the US and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or the GHF, that we've covered many times before on this channel. So again, here you have Israeli soldiers admitting things that have been full-blown denials from the US government and the Israeli government, whether it was these GHF so-called humanitarian sites that really became death traps for Palestinians. There was a full denial from the GHF and from the US and Israeli governments that this kind of thing was happening. But here we have from IDF soldiers themselves saying, yes, these were essentially death traps where the IDF would open fire at civilians, desperately trying to reach some of the limited food available inside of Gaza. And then we also have an admission here of something I've covered before on this channel, what the Israelis call the mosquito protocol, where they're using Palestinians that they abduct or kidnap inside of Gaza and then sending them into potentially dangerous situations to act as human shields to go and map things out for them, so that the IDF soldiers themselves don't have to take any risk, which again is something that they accuse Palestinians of doing, or Hamas of doing, of using civilians as human shields. And here you have yet another example of every accusation is a confession, with Israeli soldiers themselves using Palestinians as human shields. Now they continue down here. They say another soldier, identified in the program only as Eli, says, quote, "Life and death isn't determined by procedures or opening fire regulations. It's the conscience of the commander on the ground that decides." And I'll leave it up to you guys, given what we've seen in Gaza, to estimate what that kind of conscience or lack thereof looks like for your average IDF commander. They say in those circumstances, the designation of who is an enemy or a terrorist becomes arbitrary, Eli says in the documentary, with a quote, "If they're walking too fast, they're suspicious. If they're walking too slow, they're suspicious. They're plotting something. If three men are walking and one of them lags behind, it's a 2-to-1 infantry formation. It's a military formation." They say Eli describes an incident in which a senior officer ordered a tank to demolish a building in an area designated as safe for civilians. Again, reminder, there has never been any real safe zone inside of Gaza. Israel has been repeatedly targeting the so-called safe zones. And the specific example here is a man was standing on the roof hanging laundry, and the officer decided that he was a spotter. He's not a spotter. He's hanging his laundry. You can see that he's hanging laundry. He says now, it's not as if this man has binoculars or weapons. The closest military force was 600 to 700 meters away. So unless he had eagle eyes, how could he possibly be a spotter? And the tank shell fired, and the building half collapsed, and the result was many dead and wounded. They continue. They say Guardian analysis in August of the IDF's intelligence, their own intelligence data, showed that by the reckoning of Israeli military officials, 83% of those killed in Gaza were civilians, a historic high for modern conflicts, though the IDF disputed the analysis, which again comes from their own intelligence data, which could give you an estimation that, if anything, this 83% is probably an undercount. Minimum 83% of those killed in Gaza have been civilians. They say in a written statement, the IDF, trying to counter this article, I guess, says the IDF remains committed to the rule of law, really, and continues to operate in accordance with its legal and ethical obligations, really, despite the unprecedented operational complexity posed by Hamas's systematic embedding within civilian infrastructure and its use of civilian sites for military purposes. I mean, again, the every accusation is a confession. We just talked about IDF soldiers admitting that they're using Palestinians as human shields. I've shown you guys many examples before on this channel of IDF soldiers inside of Gaza literally using hospitals or schools that they've completely destroyed as military bases inside of Gaza for their own troops. I mean, again, the idea that I'm supposed to take at face value that, it's actually Hamas that's using all of these human shields and embedding themselves within civilian military sites, when I know that's what you're doing and that you're following in accordance with international law and your own legal standards and obligations. I mean, it's a sick joke. It's a sick joke that obviously nobody should take at face value. And again, you're being contradicted with this official IDF statement by your own soldiers who are admitting that none of this is true. And in fact, the complete inverse of this is the actual reality. Now, they continue. They say some of the soldiers interviewed in the Breaking Ranks program said that they were influenced by the language of Israeli politicians and religious leaders, suggesting that after Hamas attacked on October 7th in 2023, in which about 1,200 Israelis and foreign nationals were killed, every Palestinian was a legitimate target. They say a UN commission concluded in September that Israel had committed genocide in Gaza, and one of the most important aspects of proving a genocide case is the instance of intent, right? You have to have the intent to commit this genocide. And so on this question, it pointed to the incitement from Israeli leaders such as President Isaac Herzog, who shortly after the October 7th attack said, quote, "It is an entire nation out there that is responsible. It is not true. This rhetoric about civilians, not aware, not involved, it's absolutely not true." And of course, we went through the South Africa case that came out in, I believe, December of 2023, where they documented dozens and dozens of different statements from high-ranking Israeli politicians and government officials who said, things like this or things even much worse than this, in terms of saying there are no civilians inside of Gaza, in terms of admitting that they were planning to conduct collective punishment inside of Gaza. And the reason that this is important, again, is that you have testimony here from Israeli soldiers saying, you hear stuff like this all the time, you start to believe it. I mean, this is direct testimony from IDF soldiers themselves that this genocide case on the question of intent is entirely valid. Right? They're saying it's because I heard people like the president, Isaac Herzog, or people like Benjamin Netanyahu, or Itamar Ben-Gvir, or Bezalel Smotrich, that I then felt validated to commit this genocide. So again, the case of genocide against Israel, if you weren't convinced as of now, here you have IDF soldiers in this documentary basically confirming what we've been reporting for the last two and a bit years on this channel. Now, continuing on here, we also have some new BBS footage because some journalistic outlets have been allowed into the, behind the yellow line where the IDF is still occupying inside of Gaza to get a little bit of footage. So let's go ahead and watch this quick little clip here of just the endless destruction that the IDF has brought about inside of Gaza.
If you're looking for Gaza, this is what's left. The Gaza of maps and memories is gone. To the right is Bet Hanun, once home to tens of thousands of people. This is Shujaya, a flat landscape of rubble stretching all the way into Gaza City. Unrecognizable as the city residents knew before the war. A city of parks and avenues, of traffic jams, cafes and villas on the coast.
This is just a taste of what 2 years of war has done to Gaza. We're just a short distance away from the yellow line that now divides Gaza.
I mean, again, this is not what normal warfare looks like. You don't get a before and after of this being the after and this being the before, and then come to the conclusion that what exactly? There were IDF militants positioned in every single one of these buildings inside of Gaza, under every single tree, inside of every graveyard that's been destroyed, inside of every school, every mosque, every church, every hospital. That's what we're supposed to believe. I mean, again, you can look at the footage and I think it speaks for itself when you see what the endless carnage, death, and destruction looks like inside of Gaza. Now, as a reminder here, just over the month or so that this ceasefire has been in effect, the IDF has violated this ceasefire upwards of hundreds of times at this point. I mean, there have been 242 Palestinians that have been killed and 622 that have been injured. So here from Al Jazeera, They say 1 month into the declaration of a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, Israel has violated the agreement with near daily attacks, killing hundreds of people. They say they violated the ceasefire agreement at least 282 times from October 10th to November 10th, so yesterday, through the continuation of attacks by air, artillery, and direct shootings, according to the government media office in Gaza. They say the office said that Israel shot at civilians 88 times, raided residential areas beyond the yellow line that they're supposed to be staying behind up to 12 times. They bombed Gaza 124 times and demolished people's properties on 52 occasions. And it added that Israel also detained 23 Palestinians from Gaza over the past month. And they also say that Israel has continued to block vital humanitarian aid and destroyed homes and infrastructure across Gaza. So again, this is why we call it a sort of quiet or a silent genocide that is continuing, because it never stopped, right? There's barely been a single day. And in fact, they put a calendar down here in this article where you can see it. There's barely been, 6 days out of the past 31 in which there hasn't been a deadly attack on Gaza. So this is why we call it a sort of quiet genocide that is continuing on a near daily basis inside of Gaza, despite the lack of, media coverage and despite the insistence that the ceasefire is holding strong. Consider for a second that if there had been 282 violations from Hamas against Israel, if there had been 242 Israelis who were killed over the last month, with over 600 injured by Hamas rockets or whatever, do you think that the mainstream media here, do you think that the U.S. government here, do you think that the Israeli government would consider this ceasefire to be a ceasefire? No, of course not. It's only because Palestinians are so thoroughly dehumanized, both in Israel and here in the United States and broadly across the West, that this is just considered normal, that people can still overlook this and say that the ceasefire is an actual ceasefire. No, it's not. And if it was hundreds of Israelis that have been killed over the last month, you certainly wouldn't be framing it as that. Right now, just as one example, in terms of these some of these attacks that Israel continues to conduct on a near daily basis, they say here from Dropsite that a couple of days ago, Israel killed a child in Gaza, saying that the, quote, terrorist was an imminent threat to its troops. The Israeli army said that it eliminated 2 terrorists near the yellow line who posed an imminent threat to its troops in southern Gaza. Al Jazeera reports that the drone strike killed 2 Palestinians, including a child, and came amid new Israeli air raids on eastern Gaza City and the south of the enclave. So this is how the Israelis talk, right? It's a child who's walking near this sort of arbitrary line that, oh, by the way, we've extended, and oh, by the way, doesn't actually exist on the ground. It's just an arbitrary point that the Israelis have made up. If you come close to this line, we get to kill you. And then even if you're a child, we'll say that you are a terrorist posing an imminent threat to our troops. That's sort of the baseline reality as Palestinians are trying to return, in all likelihood, to the rubble that once was their home inside of Gaza. Now, we also have, again, as they pointed out in that Al Jazeera article, the continuation of restricting aid inside of Gaza. So here from, I believe this is Haaretz, Israel blocks humanitarian groups from delivering essential aid despite the calm in Gaza. Again, the framing here is ludicrous, but they're still continuing to block humanitarian aid. You can see this in videos like this with Channel 4 documenting some of the many warehouses that are filled with tons of aid that the Israeli authorities are not letting through to Gaza. They say it's estimated that there is enough aid for 150 trucks per day, 5 days per week for 3 months to help Palestinians. And they say we have reached out to the Israeli government for response, and I wonder what their response will be. And again, you can see behind him just stacks and stacks, pallets full of aid that should be getting into Gaza, but isn't, because Israel is once again violating the ceasefire and restricting the aid from actually getting to Palestinians inside of the yellow line that desperately need it. Now, 2 quick videos here that I wanted to show you guys, just to get, I guess, sort of an insight into the mindset of some of these Israeli soldiers. This first one is of a guy who lost his brother, who was one of these guys who was driving the bulldozers in southern Gaza, demolishing Palestinian homes, right? And so he was killed about October 28th or so. And this is how his brother was, I guess, giving sort of a eulogy or a statement after his death. He said, and this is in Hebrew, so I won't play the video, but he said, sort of reminiscing, I used to argue with you about which excavator is best for demolishing a house in Gaza, Hyundai or Volvo. Like, this is how he's referencing, I guess, his brother-in-law, right? This is how he's reminiscing about him. Not like he was a loving, family guy, he was a loving father or husband or whatever. No, it's like we used to reminisce and bond over the model of vehicle that was best for destroying Palestinian homes. This is the sort of, I guess, normalized insanity that exists within the Israeli military. Another example of that here. This is a guy who lost his leg inside of Gaza, presumably, and he's being interviewed by, I guess, a journalist here. And she says, "Wow, look at the the prosthesis and everything. What do you want to do moving forward?" And he says basically, look, it's nice, it's flexible too. She says, "What's the dream?" And he says, "To put a tripod here with a mag, enter Gaza, and then kill everyone. Kill everyone. That's the dream." And she says, "Good luck." I mean, as pointed out here by Shael Ben Ephraim, he says the most horrifying part of this isn't necessarily that he says he wants to kill everyone in Gaza. It's that the interviewer then laughs in like this chilling way and says, "Good luck." I mean, again, this is the media ecosystem inside of Israel. This is the baseline of Israeli soldiers where you go and you get your leg blown up, and then the first thing you're thinking about is, yeah, I wish I could use this prosthetic leg as a tripod to go back into Gaza and to murder a bunch of people. I mean, again, just to give you a couple examples of the psyche of what we're talking about here. Now, we also have, as pointed out here by Miriam Barghouti and Prem Thakur, this video of, I guess this psycho fascist minister of national security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is celebrating and handing out sweets inside of the Israeli Knesset after they just approved the first reading of a new bill that will legalize the execution of Palestinian detainees. Right, and as pointed out here by Prem, he says this is a perfect distillation of the past few years. Israeli politicians, not just Netanyahu, seek the execution of Palestinians who are imprisoned without due process, aka they're hostages, and then officials celebrate the barbarity by handing out sweets, and this is all taking place during a ceasefire and not a whisper from the mainstream media. I mean, again, you can see him walking around the Knesset handing out sweets, handing out candy inside the Knesset, celebrating that the Israeli military will be able to kidnap Palestinians, no due process whatsoever, no fair trial or anything like that, and then sentence them to execution. I mean, again, imagine if this was the reverse. How up in arms the mainstream media would be. For Israel, there's not even a word of this. You will not see this on MSNBC. You will not see this on Fox News. You will see this tweeted by 0 American politicians, right? But this is what's happening in the Israeli government. Now, moving on, we also have another report here detailing some of the torture and specifically sexual torture that Palestinians were subjected to in Israeli detention. And this is getting some of the testimonies directly from people who were then returned back as a part of this alleged ceasefire deal to Gaza. So a little bit on that here real quick. They say the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, the PCHR, documents one of the most heinous crimes that can be committed against human beings and their dignity in the modern era. In recent weeks, PCHR staff collected new testimonies from a number of Palestinian detainees from the Gaza Strip who were recently released from Israeli prisons and detention camps. These accounts reveal an organized and systematic practice of sexual torture, including rape, forced stripping, forced filming, sexual assault using objects and dogs, in addition to deliberate psychological humiliation aimed at crushing human dignity and erasing individual identity entirely. They say that PCHR affirms that the testimonies do not reflect isolated incidents, but constitute a systematic policy practiced in the context of an ongoing crime of genocide against more than 2 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, including thousands of detainees held in prisons and military camps closed to international monitoring bodies, including the International Committee of the Red Cross. And keep in mind, this, it was just a week ago or so that I covered the story of the top Israeli military lawyer who was not only, forced out of her position and stripped of her military titles, but was outright arrested for daring to release a video that directly showed a gang of IDF prison guards sexually torturing and abusing a Palestinian detainee, right? And she released that video, and Israeli society was in a massive uproar, not because of the video, not because of the treatment of this Palestinian, who then had to go through, I believe, like over 20 surgeries to repair his injuries. They weren't in an uproar over that. They were in an uproar over the idea that there may be any form of accountability for the soldiers who perpetuated that assault. So again, an insight into Israeli society. This is our partner in the Middle East, right? Now, a couple more things here. On the West Bank, right? Because this is obviously not nearly covered as much as Gaza, but is equally as important. So here from Shael Ben Ephraim, he says, Israel has announced that it is establishing 13 new settlements in the West Bank. The apartheid and occupation regime deepens with every passing year. We've also had drastic increases in the number of assaults and attacks by some of these terrorist thug settlers inside of the West Bank. This one specifically was an attack on Palestinians and journalists in the West Bank at an olive harvest, where you can see here some of these journalists, some of them working for Reuters, by the way, who were beaten with sticks by these settlers, I mean, in broad daylight. And if you think that the IDF or the occupation forces are not aware that this is happening, or that they're not, in many cases, directly involved in it, you would be mistaken. But again, this is sort of how emboldened they are, right? They are willing to go around in broad daylight and assault not only, Palestinian civilians whose land they're trying to steal, but also, journalists who are carrying around cameras, right, documenting all of this. They do this in broad daylight. And this is only a couple weeks after we had an American Jewish journalist, Jasper Nathaniel, who we also had on when this happened a couple weeks ago on Breaking Points, by the way. But he said that Israeli soldiers lured him and Palestinian olive farmers into an ambush in Palestine's occupied West Bank, leading them towards nearly 100 armed illegal settlements and then fleeing. They say the unprovoked attack, which took place on October 19th, was captured on video by the Brooklyn-based journalist, who says he narrowly escaped an attempted killing as settlers set cars on fire, beat the farmers with clubs, and chased him. And then when Nathaniel, on top of all of this, tried to call the U.S. Embassy in Israel to ask for help because he's a fucking American, he was told that they couldn't protect him. So, I mean, again, look, there are Americans who have been detained by Israel, essentially held hostage by Israel. There have been Americans who have been, run over by tanks by Israel. There are Americans who have been attacked by Israeli settlers inside of Israel. There have been journalists who have been murdered by Israel. And what does the U.S. government do about it? They throw their hands up in the air. They say, nothing we can do about it. I mean, you can see here from the text messages, if you want to go and read how the U.S. Embassy responded. I mean, he's saying, we need American protection. We are Americans. They say, we don't have the manpower. Sorry. He says, I'm an American tourist. Can you protect me? They say the protection of American citizens is always the responsibility of the host nation government. He says, are you implying that the Israeli government will protect me and the other Americans here? I don't understand. The IDF led us directly into an ambush. He says, that's what's supposed to happen, yes. So he's asking the U.S. Embassy for help because the IDF just led him into an ambush of Israeli settlers. And the U.S. government response to that is, well, it's up to the Israelis to protect you, after they just lured him into this ambush. I mean, absolute insanity, just an insult to Americans. Now they continue, they say here from Al Jazeera that the Israeli army, in its totality, as well as settlers, have attacked inside of the West Bank 2,350 times in just the last month. Let me say that again, 2,350 times that have been documented, by the way, in just the last month. That's an average of, I believe, over 70 attacks per day inside of the West Bank. I mean, it's an unfathomable, as I point out here, cycle of terror that is happening to Palestinians in the West Bank on a literal daily basis by the dozens. 2,300 attacks in a month. Now, last couple things here. Again, we have some updates on Lebanon because although there has supposedly been, checking in on how Israel acts during ceasefires, right? In Gaza, they continue to kill on a near daily basis. They continue to bomb. In Lebanon, it's the same exact thing. I mean, there have been, no joke, thousands of violations of the alleged ceasefire in Lebanon that's supposedly been in place for months and months at this point. But now they're ramping up some of these strikes. So here from Dropsite, they say Israel has launched a new wave of strikes across southern Lebanon. The Israeli military unleashed heavy strikes across various parts of southern Lebanon in what Al Jazeera described as the most serious escalation since the ceasefire that ended the 2024 war with Hezbollah. They say Israel's security cabinet convened today to assess the escalating situation, according to Channel 12. And the outlet earlier said that Israeli officials are preparing for a potential new confrontation with Hezbollah aimed at weakening the group and pushing both Hezbollah and the Lebanese government towards what they describe as a stable agreement with Israel. A stable agreement as you violated this ceasefire thousands and thousands of times. I don't remember Lebanon, or Hezbollah for that matter, bombing inside of Israel for the last number of months since this ceasefire has been in place. It's only been a one-sided thing. And they have the audacity to say, well, we're going to escalate our offensive against you. Even though you haven't been attacking us, we're going to escalate against you because we're looking for a stable agreement. What the fuck are you talking about? I mean, again, you can see some of the images here of just the endless destruction inside of Lebanon, repeating some of the same kinds of attacks that we've seen inside of Gaza. And then we also have here, threatening to not only expand this inside of southern Lebanon, but also all the way up until Beirut. So, I mean, here from Dropsite, they say an Israeli military official threatened that if Hezbollah is not immediately disarmed, Israel, with U.S. backing, will launch broad attacks across Lebanon, including in Beirut. And as Rania points out here, the Israelis are threatening to expand their psychotic U.S.-approved bombing campaign into Beirut. There haven't been any shots fired from Lebanon at Israel. It's all meant to bully the country into giving up any mechanism to defend itself against a serial killer state. And she says this is Trump's war, and she's entirely correct. There also are reports here that in order to solidify their occupation of parts of southern Lebanon, that Israel is now building walls in territories near southern Lebanon. I mean, you can see the image of that here, and you can see the map of where this is allegedly taking place. Again, Israel is occupying Gaza, they're occupying the West Bank, they're occupying Lebanon, they're occupying Syria, and if you think they plan on giving up this territory, at least willingly, then again, I think you'd be kind of an idiot if you believe that, right? This is a part of the continuation of the greater Israel project that we're witnessing here. Now, final thing here, is pointed out once again by Shael, in terms of as all of this is going on, as Rania points out there, as Israel is acting like the serial killer state that it is, the rogue state, the terrorist state that it is, this is what they're doing in terms of trying to influence American audiences or Western audiences broadly, that they're actually great guys. They're the good guys. They're good allies. We should trust them. We should love them. We should support them. We should send them weapons. We should give them cover on the international stage. Here are some of the things that they're doing just in the last couple of months. Signing multi-million-dollar contracts with U.S.-based companies via the Government Advertising Bureau and through the German Havas Media to run advanced digital and media campaigns inside the U.S. They're utilizing highly targeted digital campaigns aimed at millions of Christians in churches, especially evangelical conservatives. And keep in mind, most Zionists in the United States are in fact Christians. They're using geofencing technology to identify and target specific locations during church services. They're running large-scale social media campaigns, producing at least 100 pieces of original content each month, including videos, podcasts, graphics, and texts. There are thousands of derivative versions monthly to generate tens of millions of exposures to younger Americans on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. They're incorporating message amplification through conservative Christian media networks such as Salem Media Network, radios, and websites. They're employing social media influencers to the tune of up to $7,000 per post, strongly identified with right-wing and pro-Israel audiences to disseminate pro-Israel messaging across Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter. They're producing physical and digital exhibits and immersive experiences like the Experience of October 7th using VR technology. They're developing AI-based operations or search and language operations to influence search engine results and conversations on AI chatbots like ChatGPT and Cloud aimed to shape public discourse by framing Israel-related topics sensitively. And they're also spending tens of millions of dollars on advertising across Google, YouTube, X, and native advertising platforms like Outbrain to promote Israel. And then, of course, we have the continuation of the push for censorship of any Americans who dare to speak out against any of this. So that's what I got for you guys today. I know that was a lot that we covered in this video, but it's important to hit all of these notes because, again, Israel is acting as a totally rogue terrorist state. Right? Continuing to occupy Lebanon, attack inside of Lebanon, inside of Syria, inside of the West Bank, inside of Gaza. None of this has stopped. There is no real ceasefire that's taken place, despite the sort of, denials from the U.S. government or from the Israelis or from the U.S. media or the lack of coverage that we've been getting on any of these things. But nothing has stopped. If anything, it's maybe become quieter for some people, but this is all continuing, right? And so it's important that we stay on top of this. So that's all I got for you guys today. I'm sure I'll have more for you guys in the coming weeks. If you made it to the end here, thanks for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff. We're trying to work our way up to 100,000 subscribers so we can continue to get this kind of coverage out to a broader audience. So, yeah, I will see you guys tomorrow.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me. Everyone is saying